Well, let's get right to it. Hi, I'm Dan Haggerty. Thanks for being with us. Welcome to the story. One word for you tonight: gerrymandering. I know, I got you hooked. Stay in your seat. You got nowhere else to be at this point. You got to hear more after that. Listen, we want to hear from you. Reach out to us, email us at thestory@kgw.com. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, use Twitter and the hashtag #HeyDan. Let's get started. Now, to our big story. Since the pandemic began, I think we've all learned that sometimes things just don't want to come easy. I mean, schools are in flux, our economy is still struggling, and now the process to redraw Oregon's political districts has come to this screeching halt because someone inside the Capitol tested positive for coronavirus. Our Maggie Vespa spent the day in Salem, and here's what she says happened.
A months-long, brutally partisan battle over redistricting in Oregon will continue for at least one more day.
Good afternoon. The House will come to order.
The House Speaker adjourning Tuesday's session before a vote could be cast. Politics thwarted by a pandemic.
Because in the last hour, we were notified that a person who was in the Capitol yesterday has tested positive for COVID.
The Speaker did not elaborate on who the person was or what job they hold. It's worth noting no Republicans were on the floor at the time. The anticlimactic end followed drama a day before.
The plan was, in fact, to get gerrymandered maps through this body no matter what.
At Monday's session, Republicans railed against House Speaker Tina Kotek for revoking her promise to let bipartisan committees lead the way in drawing up Oregon's new legislative districts. Arguing Republicans had stonewalled the process for months, Kotek announced new committees stacked with Democrats. One to approve the party's proposal of newly drawn congressional districts, the other to approve state legislative districts. Both these versions have already passed the Senate. This is happening after the 2020 census found for the first time in 40 years, Oregon's population grew by so much it needs a new 6th seat in Congress. Democrats' proposal would all but guarantee that district will be blue.
Oregonians do not deserve this.
And I know they are upset, but honestly, I have been upset with them since the census data came out.
Representative Andrea Salinas from Portland says Democrats have no choice but to push forward. Republicans only proposed one option, which includes 3 highly competitive congressional districts. A far cry, she argues, from the current congressional map.
We're working off the 2011 maps because we have to. It's in statute. You have to use existing political and geographic boundaries, and then you have to accommodate those new population areas. And they happen to be in areas that don't historically vote Republican.
All right, Maggie Vespa here now. Maggie, this session ended prematurely, obviously, around 1 o'clock today. We asked you to stay down there in Salem because, well, frankly, with Oregon politics, you never know what's going to happen. In particular, we've been trying to get in touch with GOP lawmakers. What is the status update right now?
Sure. Well, the status update is that basically there is no update at this point. We reached out to the GOP House Minority Leader, who you saw in that piece, and then the GOP Communications Office here in the House, basically asking about their reaction to today, the announcement that ended the session, and then also their plans for tomorrow. Will they walk out? Will they vote? And basically, we got a couple of no comments and responses to our emails, and then also we had a lot of people who just didn't respond at all. So right now, we're not hearing much, if anything. And this is getting down to the wire. I mean, Dan, lawmakers have until next Monday, September 27th, to finalize these maps. And per state law, if they don't meet that deadline, this basically gets punted to other authorities. Under state law, the Secretary of State, Shemia Fagan, would be in charge of redrawing the state legislative districts. And then a panel of judges will be in charge of drawing the congressional districts.
Now, we know that a hiccup with COVID is always a possibility, but today this COVID twist kind of came out of left field. Do we know anything about the person who tested positive?
Yeah, it did come out of left field. And basically, to continue that metaphor, we have rumors flying left and right about who this person is, what they do, how this could have happened with these COVID safety protocols in place here at the Capitol. But at this point, those are just rumors, so we don't want to perpetuate those on TV. And, you know, it's worth noting, understandably, neither party wants to be the one who outs someone as having come down with COVID, this still very scary and potentially very dangerous virus. Also worth noting, the speaker said today that anyone who is vaccinated does not have to quarantine. And that's important because, again, the plan right now is to have as many lawmakers who can, under those protocols, be on the floor, back on that floor tomorrow, 9 a.m., to try once again for a vote on redistricting in Oregon. So, Dan, we'll see how it goes.
All right. Maggie Vespa, thanks. Now, let's take a quick minute. I really want to discuss, and stay with me here, okay, gerrymandering for just a moment. It's when you mix a Gary and a salamander. All right, does that make sense? See, the term actually comes from Massachusetts Governor Elbridge Gerry, a founding father who decided to dramatically redraw the Senate districts in 1810 to weaken the opposing Federalist Party. And when he was all done, one of the districts was mocked in the press because of its odd shape that was clearly a political tactic. This is a picture from the Boston Sentinel in 1812. Some people said that it was shaped like a salamander, and since the media needs everything to be catchy and dramatic, they called the tactic gerrymandering. And over time, people just started referring to it as gerrymandering because, well, I don't know. But now you can be that annoying guy at the party who says, actually, it's pronounced gerrymandering. And you might be thinking, why would anybody be talking about that at a party? And now you just sound like my wife on our drive home from most parties. But I digress, and I'm going to hand over the explanation to Professor Jim Moore at Pacific University.
I was hoping you could explain gerrymandering in a simple way to people who might hear the term, recognize the term, but not quite understand what it entails.
So a gerrymander is manipulating the district so that they keep the people you want to be together, or exclude people from a district. In Oregon, we do a little bit of gerrymandering, but nothing like we see in other parts of the country.
Now, I thought gerrymandering was illegal.
You can manipulate the districts, but the Supreme Court has said the only reason you can do that is for racial or ethnic reasons. And so it prevents people, for instance, from making districts where an African-American community, a Black community, for instance, might be split. So there's no chance for a Black person to win to be the representative from that district. So that's the only thing you can take into account. You explicitly cannot take into account party registration when you make districts. And yet, it seems that everybody does it in every state in the country.
Okay, so there are rules and also plenty of gray area, which is why everyone's always accusing the other side of gerrymandering and why everyone is always kind of right, because they probably are gerrymandering at least a little bit. Now, right now, this is the new map proposed by Democrats, and according to 538, it favors Democrats, which isn't really hard to do in Oregon because we have lots of Democrats. Now, this is the map proposed by Republicans, which is more of a 50-50 kind of thing, which sounds fair, right? But it's actually favoring Republicans because the state isn't 50-50.
The most recent map is in contention right now. The Republicans are accusing the Democrats of gerrymandering. Given what you can see there, do you think they have a case?
They have a small case. The problems that the Republicans face is that when you look at the number of Republicans versus Democrats in this state, it's a 3-2 margin for the Democrats. And the population growth in the state has taken place where the Democrats live. There are more Democrats than there were 10 years ago, proportionally more than the Republicans grew during that same time.
So the Republicans have countered with a map of their own. What is your take on that map?
The Republican map for the Congress and for the legislature is designed so that the Republicans who have relatively fewer people, when you look at Democrats and Republicans, it's a 3-2 relationship. 3 Democrats for every 2 Republicans. It makes it so that the Republicans end up with half of the congressional districts, and they would probably move towards about half of the seats in the legislature, in the Senate and the House. So they would be overrepresented if the Republican maps were approved.
Which is probably one of the first factors they look at when considering if a map has been gerrymandered.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I know. It's all very riveting. I understand. I fully understand also why the 19th century media drew pictures of dragons on maps like cartographers in Middle Earth. Because a topic like this, it needs a little pizzazz. We need to spice it up just a bit. But you have to understand that these maps are a key part of representation. They're very, very important, and they're at least something that you should understand. So if you have questions, please let me know. Use that hashtag #HeyDan. Now, the big question really throughout this whole process has been, will the Republicans walk out if there's a map that they don't like? I mean, we've seen them use that tactic several times over the past few years. They walked out twice to kill cap and trade, and they were successful in doing that each time. So we're going to see what happens tomorrow when the House meets again. Now, you might be surprised to learn, some of you won't if you watch the show, we've talked about it before, but the last time a walkout happened during redistricting was actually the Democrats, not Republicans, who left. Yeah, it happened in 2001, and it included then Minority House Leader Kate Brown. So the roles were completely reversed. Let's take a quick look back in the KGW vault.
We have to conduct the people's business. And if you want that to occur, you got to show up. Colleagues, this is clearly an attempt by a minority to thwart the operation of government.
I will today issue summons to be served upon the following members.
House Speaker Mark Simmons read 25 names, fugitives from lawmaking. The legal summons order the Democrats to come back to work.
The summons that have been issued do have legal and binding authority.
Tracking down the missing Democrats has turned into a statewide case of hide and seek. Democratic Representative Kathy Lowe left us a message on the answering machine.
It's frightening to me, frankly, frightening that my own government would do this to me, when what I'm doing is trying to protect everybody from the tyranny of the majority.
She would only say she is somewhere on the green side of the mountains.
This is why we have the ability to withhold a quorum, just to protect everybody from Gestapo tactics. And
meanwhile, what remains unfinished includes how people will be allowed to vote next year. It looks like Secretary of State Bill Bradley will now get that job.
And that's exactly what happened. They missed the redistricting deadline. So the Secretary of State drew the state legislative districts then, and a panel of judges drew the congressional districts. The same thing that will happen this time around if lawmakers don't make up some type of deal and can't come to a conclusion on their maps. So we'll keep you posted. Now, I got this email from Mark. Please cover redistricting in Washington. I love that people want us to cover redistricting. Thank you, Mark. He also says we have a better system than Oregon. A little cocky, but I do like the question because Washington's proposal for state legislative districts actually just got released today. The congressional maps will be released next week. Now, unlike Oregon, Washington is not getting a new seat in Congress, but they do still have to redraw this map to reflect how the population has changed over the past decade. Remember, each district has to have an equal number of people. More people move to the Seattle area than other parts of the state, so that will impact where the districts are. Now, things work a lot differently in Washington than they do in Oregon. You see, up until 1983, the state legislature was in charge of redrawing the maps. But the voters said, we don't really like that. So we're going to create an independent redistricting commission instead. It's made up of 5 members. 2 are appointed by Democrats, 2 are appointed by Republicans, and there is a nonpartisan chair who doesn't get to vote on the maps. There are some restrictions about who can be on this, who can and cannot serve on the committee. You can't be a current or former lobbyist. You can't be a current elected official or have been one in the past 2 years. You also can't run for one of the districts that you're redrawing for 2 years after the maps go into effect. So here is who is on the current commission in Washington. The chair is Sarah Augustine, who runs a dispute resolution center in Eastern Washington. Then there's April Sims, who's on Washington's State Labor Council, appointed by Democrats. Brady Pinero Walkinshaw, sorry, Brady, is a former Democratic state rep who was appointed by Senate Democrats. Paul Graves, a former Republican state rep, was appointed by House Republicans, and Joe Fain, a former Republican state senator, appointed by state Senate Republicans. Now, his appointment has been a little controversial. See, in 2018, a Seattle woman accused Fain of raping her. He denied those allegations. He was never charged in any of that. The state Senate was going to investigate, but scrapped it after he lost re-election that same year. Now, after he was appointed to this redistricting commission earlier this year, several women's groups and sexual assault survivor groups, they called for him to resign, but he has not. So now the 4 voting members have until November 15th to agree on congressional and legislative maps. That's the state's deadline. In the meantime, you can take a look at the proposals they have so far. You can even get in there and submit your own maps. Do it this weekend. Pop a bottle of wine, hang out with the friends, draw some redistricting maps. It's probably not that fun, but you can check it out at redistricting.wa.gov.
I want to introduce you to Brandon. Like a lot of people, Brandon didn't think he needed to get vaccinated.
So I thought, okay, I don't have any underlying health issues. What do I need to worry about?
But then he got COVID and ended up in the hospital.
And I started feeling like my face was trying to melt off my skull. That's the best way I can describe it.
So now he's changed his mind about the vaccine.
I felt like it was almost karma.
We've got his story when the story continues.
That was a pretty nerdy first part of the show. I know. We're getting heavy into redistricting and gerrymandering and all that kind of stuff, but you stuck with us. All right, so I appreciate it. Keep writing in those questions and comments. Got a couple good ones I'm going to answer at the end of the show. Keep writing us at thestory@kgw.com or use that hashtag HeyDan on Twitter. Also, want to remind you about our Hey Help campaign. This has been going great. Everybody has been contributing so much. It's been fantastic. And this week we were asking you to consider donating to Girls Inc. of the Pacific Northwest. They work with schools to help support and empower girls through mentoring programs and after-school groups. And if you want to help them out, I'm guaranteeing they would appreciate it. Just open up the camera on your phone, hold it up to the QR code you see on your screen, and it'll take you to a donation page. You can also go to kgw.com/heyhelp. And this is a micro donation drive. Feel free to give any amount of money you'd like, anything you can part with, no matter how small. So, what's it take for someone who refuses to get the COVID vaccine to change their mind? Maybe, I don't know, the threat from getting fired from work. We talk about that on the show a lot. Someone maybe you know who gets very, very sick and you might change your tune. Or maybe ending up in the hospital themselves. Well, for a man in Newburgh, that last one is what it took. Here's Pat Doris.
Meet 31-year-old Brandon Stallsworth. He grew up in Warrenton near Astoria and now lives in Newburgh. He's one of those people you hear about who figures he doesn't need a COVID shot, and he told his friends they didn't need one either.
I did a physical in April, and I came back really healthy. Other than being overweight, I was a very healthy person, so I thought, okay, I don't have any underlying health issues. What do I need to worry about?
His father, Ted Stallsworth, a Warrenton Reserve police officer there in the middle, also was not vaccinated. Brandon said he's not against vaccines, but he did not trust the way the government rolled it all out, and he worried how it would affect him in the long term.
And so I was kind of just holding off, waiting, wanting to see what's going on. And like I said, I didn't know anybody that had been sick. So why get the vaccine?
In late July, Brandon and his wife Debbie and their 20-month-old Mason drove to California to visit her family. On the way back, Brandon started to feel bad. 2 days later at work outside, it got real bad. He began to shiver in 90-degree heat.
And I started feeling like my face was trying to melt off my skull. That's the best way I can describe it. It literally felt like my head was just trying to melt.
He went to urgent care and learned he had COVID.
It was embarrassment. That was the first, I'm not gonna lie, that was the first thing that hit my mind was like, oh God, I gotta face the music now. I gotta face the music with all these people that I told them that, and now I'm sick. I'm that person. I felt like it was almost karma.
After telling many friends not to bother with the vaccine, the virus was now spreading inside his body.
When I got home, and it was progressively getting worse. I mean, it was literally like minute by minute. Yeah, it was getting worse very quickly.
2 nights later, he couldn't stop coughing. Debbie drove him to the nearby Providence Hospital in Newburgh.
They did a chest x-ray, and x-rays came back normal.
Brandon shared that first x-ray with us. His lungs are supposed to look dark like that. The hospital gave him a monitoring system to use at home, allowing nurses to check his health every 4 hours. By Saturday morning, the hospital called. The numbers were bad. He needed to come back immediately. Debbie, who got vaccinated even as Brandon refused, felt a mix of emotions.
You're scared, you're worried, you're nervous, exhausted too because you're not getting any sleep, and then you've got the anger too. Because you think to yourself, like, why did you not get vaccinated? Why did you not do this? Because now here you are, so sick and in the hospital.
And it was not just Brandon. 5 days earlier, his father was also hospitalized with COVID and got very sick very fast. The family said we could use these pictures. In Newburgh, Brandon got a second chest x-ray. This time, it was not good. Here's the first one from 2 days earlier. This is the second. He said his doctors described all that white stuff in the lung area as the COVID infection.
The COVID is like a plaster. And so it affects your lungs worse because A, you can't cough it up. It's like concrete in your lungs. And B, your lungs, from what I understood, is that they don't expand very well and they can't absorb the oxygen like they're supposed to. So that's why you have a hard time. That's why my oxygen levels are dropping so, because I wasn't being able to get the oxygen to my body that I needed.
As he got worse, the Newburgh Hospital transferred him to St. Vincent's in Portland in case he would need a ventilator. The reality of it all shocked him.
I'll be honest, I think that was like the first time that I really got worried. I'll be honest, up to that point, even being on the oxygen stuff, I still was positive about it. You know, that like, okay, a couple days, I'm gonna be all right. You know, no big deal. And then when that hit, I was like, oh, dang, like this is real. You know, like, oh, okay, what's gonna happen next, you know?
In the end, he avoided the ventilator, just barely, and finally was strong enough to go home in early August. His father was not as fortunate. Ted Stallsworth, 52 years old, died on August 19th.
Well, it's crazy just that, you know, one day you're sitting there talking to somebody, and the next day you can't see them anymore.
Even with all that, Brandon won't insist that everyone get the vaccine.
I wouldn't push it on anybody, but I would definitely encourage them to have a second thought about it. You know, to really maybe look into it.
He has changed his mind on it, though. He's seen how bad things can get and how the shot will protect you. One of his sisters, who is vaccinated, also got sick.
And she was sick for a day or two. You know, like she bounced back, no problem. And I'm like, okay, so why not do it? Why not save yourself from the pain? I wouldn't want this on my worst enemy. It's so terrible to go through what I went through. And what my father, and the rest, and it's not just, but that's the thing, it's not even just me and my father. It's the rest of the family. What everyone went through, it's terrible.
Pat Doris, KGW News.
Now, on that note, why don't we count some vaccines and take a look at who is vaccinated and who is not. More than 2.78 million people, 66%, a little bit more of the population in Oregon, has at least one dose of one of the vaccines, and that counts even kids under 12 who I know can't get the vaccine yet. In Washington, more than 5.37 million people have gotten at least their first dose. That works out to be about 70% of the state's entire population, including kids. All right, keep sending in your questions and your comments. Send them to the story at KGW.com. We'll read a few as we finish the story next. All right, a couple of comments. Stephen wrote in and said, hey, Dan, is the 3-2 Democrats to Republicans a misleading statistic in Oregon? Because wouldn't unaffiliated voters be the second largest group of voters? You're correct. Now, the ratio from Democrats to Republicans remains 3-2, but the second largest group of voters in the state are unaffiliated. And I was talking to Professor Moore about this, and maybe we will do a little bit more on this topic because I think it's very interesting. And his perspective was that in the next 10 years, the number of unaffiliated voters is expected to surpass the number of Democrats, making that the majority of people in the state. And they're kind of left behind in this conversation because the two parties, the Democrats and Republicans, are the one in charge. He thinks the only way that's going to change is if we start having elected officials who actually run as unaffiliated voters and or unaffiliated candidates and find ways to speak to that group of people in ways that the other two parties have not. But Steve, good question. Hopefully I explained it in a decent enough way. And then Eileen wrote in and said, Dan and crew, thank you for covering the Oregon legislature / redistricting as good as any TV drama. That's sarcastic. Are you being serious? Because I think I have some recommendations for you. Are you on Netflix? You have HBO Now or Go or whatever they're calling it? Get one of those. Write me back. I'll give you some good TV dramas. But in the meantime, wow, that's nice. I like nice stuff. Thanks for being with us. Keep writing in your questions. I'll see you tomorrow.